The piercing scream echoed through the Colorado forest, startling a flock of birds into flight as Penelope Armstrong struggled desperately beneath the massive pine that had her pinned to the forest floor. The year was 1875, and what had begun as a simple expedition to gather herbs for her father's apothecary had turned into a nightmare when a sudden gust of wind sent the weakened tree crashing down upon her. "Help!" she cried out, her voice growing hoarse from shouting. The afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy above, casting dappled shadows across her face as she pushed against the rough bark with all her might. The weight was crushing, pressing against her lower body with unyielding pressure. Though her legs weren't directly crushed, she was thoroughly trapped, unable to free herself from the timber prison. Penelope had never felt so utterly helpless. At 22 years of age, she had prided herself on her independence, often venturing into the wilderness surrounding the growing settlement of Silverdale against her father's wishes. Now, as the hours ticked by and the forest grew quiet around her, she began to wonder if her stubborn nature would be her undoing. The sound of hooves broke through her spiral of despair. Distant at first, then growing closer, the steady rhythm of a horse's approach sent a surge of hope through her veins. "Over here," she shouted, summoning her remaining strength. "Please, I'm trapped." The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped altogether. A moment later, the crunch of boots on forest debris reached her ears before a tall figure emerged from between the trees. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. The man before her stood well over 6 feet, his broad shoulders filling out a worn leather vest that covered a simple cotton shirt. Dust clung to his denim trousers, and a wide-brimmed hat shaded eyes that studied her predicament with immediate concern. A golden beard, neatly trimmed, framed a face weathered by sun and wind. At his side hung a holstered revolver, and strapped to his saddle was a gleaming axe. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and measured as he quickly assessed the situation. "Don't you worry now, I'll have you out of there." "Thank God," Penelope whispered, tears of relief springing to her eyes. "I've been here for hours." The stranger removed his hat, revealing tousled sandy blonde hair as he knelt beside her. "Name's Yates Thornton. What happened here, miss?" "Armstrong, Penelope Armstrong," she replied, wincing as she tried to shift beneath the weight. "I was gathering herbs when the wind picked up. The tree. It just came down so fast." Yates nodded, his expression serious as he examined how the log lay across her skirts. "Miss Armstrong, I'm going to need to cut you free. This tree's too heavy to lift. Are you hurt anywhere that you can tell?" Penelope took stock of her body. "I don't think anything's broken. My legs are pinned, but there's a slight hollow in the ground beneath me that kept me from being crushed. I can't move." "That's fortunate," Yates said, relief evident in his voice. "I'm going to get my axe. Don't try to move, I'll be right back." He returned moments later, the well-maintained axe gripped firmly in his hands. The blade caught the sunlight as he positioned himself carefully beside her. "I need to cut close to where you're trapped," he explained, his eyes finding hers. "I promise to be careful, but I need you to remain absolutely still." "Can you do that for me, Miss Armstrong?" Penelope nodded, her throat tight with fear. "Yes. Good. Now I want you to look at me, not at the axe. Keep your eyes on mine." She obeyed, finding herself staring into eyes the color of a summer sky. There was something reassuring in his steady gaze, a confidence that calmed her racing heart. The first swing of the axe sent vibrations through the log, and Penelope flinched involuntarily. "Easy now," Yates murmured. "Keep looking at me. Tell me about yourself. What brings a young woman out into these woods alone?" Penelope swallowed hard, grateful for the distraction as the axe bit into the wood again. "My father runs the apothecary in Silverdale." I help him prepare remedies, and I've always had a knack for finding the best herbs. Swing, chunk. The rhythm of the axe striking wood filled the forest. An apothecary's daughter, Yates commented, his breathing steady despite the exertion. That's a useful skill in these parts. Not many trained doctors around here. My father learned from his father, and he taught me everything he knows, she replied, trying to ignore the shower of wood chips falling around her. I was searching for Yarrow when this happened. Yates paused, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. Yarrow. For bleeding, isn't it? Penelope couldn't hide her surprise. Yes, that's right. How would a cowboy know about medicinal herbs? A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he repositioned himself for another strike. I've picked up a few things in my travels. When you live on the trail, you learn to patch yourself up or suffer the consequences. For the next 20 minutes, Yates worked methodically, the powerful muscles in his arms and shoulders flexing with each swing. Penelope found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking, the determination in his jaw, the careful precision of each strike, the gentle way he spoke to her between breaths. Finally, she felt the pressure on her legs lessen as Yates cut through the last section of wood. Almost there, he said, setting the axe aside and moving to the section he'd nearly severed. I'm going to lift this piece now. When I do, I need you to pull yourself free. Can you do that? Penelope nodded, bracing her hands against the forest floor. I'm ready. With a grunt of effort, Yates lifted the section of log. Penelope immediately scrambled backward, dragging herself away from the tree until she was clear of its reach. When Yates let the timber fall with a heavy thud, she was safely beyond its grasp. Freedom washed over her like a cool mountain stream. Penelope took a deep breath, savoring the sensation before attempting to stand. Her legs, however, had other ideas. After hours of restricted blood flow, they tingled painfully and refused to support her weight. She stumbled, a small cry escaping her lips. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Easy there, Yates said, his voice close to her ear as he steadied her. Your legs need time to wake up. Here, sit down for a moment. He helped her to a nearby fallen log, one considerably smaller than her former prison, and knelt before her, gently kneading her calves through her skirts. This will help the blood flow return, he explained, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands so capable of wielding an axe. You're lucky I heard you. I wasn't planning on taking this trail today. Penelope watched him work, her cheeks warming at the impropriety of a strange man touching her legs, even through layers of fabric. Yet there was nothing untoward in his manner, only concern and competence. What changed your mind? She asked. Yates looked up, meeting her gaze. I was tracking a mountain lion that's been bothering some of the ranches north of here. Lost its trail about 2 miles back and decided to cut through this forest instead of going around. Guess that was fortunate for both of us. A mountain lion hunter? Penelope questioned, thinking he didn't quite fit her idea of a typical bounty hunter. Among other things, he replied with a slight shrug. I do what needs doing. Right now, that's making sure you get home safely. The feeling was returning to Penelope's legs in waves of prickling discomfort. She winced, and Yates immediately lightened his touch. Sorry, he said. It'll hurt a bit before it gets better. It's all right, she assured him. I'm just grateful you found me. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Yates didn't respond immediately, his expression sobering. They both knew what would have happened. Exposure, predators, or simple dehydration would have claimed her life. The forests of Colorado were beautiful but unforgiving. Can you tell me how far we are from Silverdale? He asked instead, changing the subject. About 4 miles east, Penelope replied. I've been collecting herbs in these woods for years. Never had a tree try to kill me before today. A smile tugged at the corner of Yates's mouth. Trees can be treacherous that way, always plotting against unsuspecting herb gatherers. The absurdity of the statement, coupled with the relief of her rescue, bubbled up inside Penelope until a laugh escaped her lips. It felt good to laugh after hours of fear and desperation. Yates's smile widened in response, transforming his rugged features into something unexpectedly handsome. "Think you can stand now?" Penelope nodded, accepting his outstretched hand. This time her legs held her weight, though they trembled slightly. "Good," Yates said, not releasing her hand. "My horse is just beyond those trees. I'll take you back to town." "My basket," Penelope remembered suddenly, looking around. "I had a basket of herbs." Yates followed her gaze, spotting the overturned basket several feet away. He retrieved it, finding most of the contents scattered but salvageable. As he gathered the herbs, Penelope watched him, struck by the care he took with her simple belongings. "You don't seem like most cowboys I've encountered," she observed as he handed her the refilled basket. "Is that so?" Yates replied, amusement in his voice. "And how many cowboys have you encountered, Miss Armstrong? Enough to know they're usually not so." She paused, searching for the right word. "Considerate." Yates adjusted his hat, his expression unreadable. "Well, my mother taught me manners before she taught me to ride. Some lessons stick better than others." He led her to where his horse waited patiently, a sturdy palomino gelding with intelligent eyes. "This is Copper," Yates introduced, patting the horse's neck. "He's steady as they come. I'll help you up, and then we'll head to town." With surprising ease, he lifted Penelope onto the saddle, then mounted behind her. The intimacy of the position, his chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins, sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes, thank you," she managed, grateful he couldn't see her blush. As they rode through the forest, Penelope became increasingly aware of the man behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the security of his presence, the faint scent of leather and pine that clung to him. They talked easily, Yates asking about her life in Silverdale and Penelope learning that he had been wandering the Western Territories for nearly 5 years, taking work where he could find it. "Before that, I worked my father's ranch in Texas," he explained as they emerged from the forest onto a well-traveled road. "But after the war, things changed. Couldn't stay in one place anymore." The war. Penelope calculated quickly. If he had fought in the Civil War, Yates must be at least in his early 30s, a decade older than herself. "Were you a soldier?" she asked carefully, knowing many men didn't like to speak of those dark years. "Cavalry," he replied simply, and something in his tone told her not to press further. They crested a hill, and the settlement of Silverdale came into view below them, a growing town nestled in a valley, with a main street lined with wooden buildings and a church steeple rising above the rest. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the distant sounds of activity drifted up to meet them. "That's my father's shop," Penelope pointed to a 2-story building near the center of town. "The one with the green trim and the mortar and pestle painted on the sign." As they rode down the main street, Penelope was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. A young woman riding into town with an unknown cowboy was sure to set tongues wagging. She could already imagine Mrs. Halloway, the postmaster's wife and Silverdale's most notorious gossip, spreading the news before sundown. They reached the apothecary, and Yates dismounted first before reaching up to help Penelope down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary, and their eyes met briefly before the shop door burst open. "Penelope." Her father rushed out, relief and anger warring on his weathered face. Matthew Armstrong was a lean man with graying hair and spectacles that magnified his concerned eyes. "Where have you been? I was about to organize a search party." "Father, I'm fine," Penelope assured him, suddenly aware of how she must look her dress dirty and torn, her hair falling from its pins. "There was an accident in the forest. A tree fell and trapped me." Matthew's gaze shifted to Yates, suspicion replacing concern. "And who might you be, sir?" Yates removed his hat respectfully. "Yates Thornton, Mr. Armstrong. I was passing through when I heard your daughter calling for help. She was pinned under a fallen log." "He cut me free with his axe," Penelope added, gesturing to the tool still strapped to Copper's saddle. "I would still be there if not for Mr. Thornton." The apothecary's expression softened marginally. "Then it seems I owe you my gratitude, Mr. Thornton. Please, come inside." The interior of the apothecary was cool and dim, lined with shelves of glass bottles and jars containing everything from dried herbs to tinctures. A counter ran along one wall, behind which stood a workspace filled with scales, mortars, and various implements of the trade. The scent of herbs and medicines permeated the air. "Sit down, Penelope," her father instructed, gesturing to a chair. "Let me look at your legs." "I'm fine, father, truly," she protested, though she did as he asked. "Just a bit sore." Matthew knelt to examine her, his trained eyes assessing for injury. Finding no serious damage, he turned his attention to Yates, who stood awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. "You have my sincere thanks, Mr. Thornton," Matthew said, extending his hand. "My daughter is all I have in this world." Yates shook the offered hand firmly. "Any decent man would have done the same, sir." "Perhaps, but it was you who was there when needed." Matthew studied the younger man thoughtfully. "Are you passing through Silverdale, or do you have business here?" "Just passing through," Yates replied. "Though I may stay a day or two to rest my horse before moving on." "The Silverton Hotel at the end of the street is decent enough," Matthew suggested. "Or if you prefer something less expensive, Mrs. Caldwell rents rooms above the bakery." Penelope watched this exchange with interest, noting how her father's initial suspicion had given way to a cautious acceptance. It wasn't like him to warm so quickly to strangers, especially not those of the cowboy variety. "Mr. Thornton," she spoke up, drawing both men's attention. "Would you join us for supper tonight? It's the least we can do to thank you." Matthew raised an eyebrow at his daughter's boldness but nodded in agreement. "Indeed, we'd be honored if you join us. 7 o'clock. Yates looked between father and daughter, seeming to hesitate before inclining his head. "That's very kind. I accept with pleasure." After Yates departed to secure lodging, Matthew turned to his daughter with a questioning look. "Now, tell me exactly what happened out there." Penelope recounted the day's events as she helped her father prepare remedies for tomorrow's customers. She tried to keep her description of Yates factual and unemotional, but something in her voice must have betrayed her fascination, for her father gave her a knowing look. "He seems a decent sort," Matthew conceded as they worked, "though these wandering types rarely stay in one place long." "I'm merely being grateful, father," Penelope protested, perhaps too quickly. "He saved my life." "Indeed he did," her father agreed, measuring powder into a small envelope. "And for that, I am truly thankful. Just remember that gratitude and other feelings can sometimes become confused in circumstances such as these." Penelope felt her cheeks warm but said nothing more on the subject. As she climbed the stairs to their living quarters above the shop to prepare for supper, she couldn't help but wonder if her father was right. Was her interest in Yates Thornton merely gratitude, or was it something more? She bathed and changed into her best everyday dress, a sky-blue cotton with white trim that brought out the hazel in her eyes. Her chestnut hair, usually bound in a practical bun during working hours. She arranged in loose curls that framed her face. Looking in the mirror, Penelope told herself she was simply showing proper respect for a guest, not trying to impress him. The lie didn't even convince herself. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at the shop's door. Penelope's heart quickened as she hurried down the stairs, reaching the door just as her father emerged from the back room. She paused, letting him answer it as propriety demanded. Yates stood on the threshold, his tall frame filling the doorway. He had cleaned up considerably. His clothes, while still worn, were fresh, and his hair was damp from washing. In his hand, he held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Good evening, Mr. Armstrong," he greeted. Then his eyes found Penelope, and something in his expression softened. "Miss Armstrong." "Welcome, Mr. Thornton," Matthew said, stepping aside to let him enter. "We were just about to head upstairs for supper." Yates offered the flowers to Penelope with a slight bow. "I found these on my way here, thought they might brighten your table." "They're lovely," Penelope said, accepting them with a smile. "Thank you." The family living quarters were modest but comfortable, a combined kitchen and dining area, a small sitting room and 2 bedrooms. Matthew had prepared a simple but hearty meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and early summer vegetables from the market. Penelope arranged the wildflowers in a small vase as the center of the table. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Penelope had expected. Yates spoke of his travels through the territories, from the deserts of Arizona to the mountains of Montana. He had a way of telling stories that brought distant places to life, and Penelope found herself hanging on his every word. "Have you always wanted to travel?" she asked as her father served apple pie for dessert. Yates considered the question, setting down his fork. "Not always. Once, I thought I'd follow my father's footsteps, raise horses and cattle in Texas until I was too old to sit a saddle. Then the war came, and afterward, home didn't feel like home anymore." "Many men felt that way," Matthew commented. "The war changed everything." "That it did, sir," Yates agreed quietly. "But enough about my wanderings. Tell me about Silverdale. It seems a prosperous little town." "Growing every day," Matthew said with pride. "When we arrived 10 years ago, it was little more than a trading post. Now we have a proper school, a church, and businesses of all sorts. The silver mine 15 miles north has brought steady work and commerce." "And outlaws," Penelope added. "Every payday the miners come to town and trouble follows." "Penelope," her father admonished. "It's true," she insisted. "Just last month there was a shooting at the Silver Dollar Saloon, and the month before that Mrs. Tanner's store was robbed." Yates's expression grew thoughtful. "That's often the way of mining towns. Money flows and trouble follows it like a shadow." "Sheriff Davis does what he can," Matthew said, "but he's getting on in years and his deputy is barely old enough to shave." "Is there no marshal in these parts?" Yates asked. "Territorial marshal comes through every few months," Matthew explained. "But he has a large territory to cover. We mostly handle our own troubles." After supper, they moved to the small sitting room where Matthew offered Yates a pipe and tobacco. The 2 men smoked while Penelope served coffee, the conversation turning to politics and the challenges facing the Colorado Territory as it pushed for statehood. As the evening wore on, Penelope found herself watching Yates when he wasn't looking, the way his large hands gently held the delicate coffee cup, the thoughtful expression that crossed his face when listening to her father's opinions, the occasional glance he cast in her direction when he thought she wouldn't notice. All too soon, the mantel clock struck 10, and Yates rose to his feet. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," he said. "Thank you for a wonderful meal and even better company." "It was our pleasure," Matthew replied, extending his hand. "Will you be staying in Silverdale long?" "A few days at least," Yates answered, shaking the older man's hand. "My horse could use the rest, and I find I'm in no particular hurry." Penelope felt a flutter of hope at his words. "Perhaps I could show you around town tomorrow," she offered, ignoring her father's raised eyebrow. "After my morning duties at the shop, of course." Yates smiled, and the warmth of it reached his eyes. "I'd like that very much, Miss Armstrong." "Penelope will be free after noon," Matthew said, his tone making it clear this was as much permission as warning. "She can meet you at the town square." "I'll be there," Yates promised, his eyes finding Penelope's once more before he took his leave. After closing the door behind their guest, Matthew turned to his daughter with a knowing look. "He's taken with you." Penelope busied herself collecting coffee cups. "He's merely being polite, father." "I've lived long enough to know the difference between politeness and interest," Matthew replied dryly. "Just as I know my daughter well enough to see she returns that interest." Penelope sighed, setting down the cups. "He saved my life. Is it so strange that I would find him fascinating?" "Not strange at all," her father said gently. "But do be careful with your heart, Penny. Men who wander rarely stay rooted for long." That night, as Penelope lay in bed, her father's words echoed in her mind. She knew he was right. Yates Thornton was a man without ties, a drifter who had already admitted he couldn't stay in one place. Yet she couldn't help the excitement that built within her at the thought of seeing him again tomorrow. Outside her window, the stars glittered over Silverdale, and somewhere in the town below, a cowboy with an axe and gentle hands might be looking up at the same sky, perhaps thinking of her as she was thinking of him. Morning brought a steady stream of customers to the apothecary, keeping both Penelope and her father busy. Word of her ordeal had spread through town, and many came as much for the story as for their medicinal needs. Penelope found herself recounting her rescue more times than she could count, each retelling bringing Yates Thornton's actions into sharper focus in her mind. "And he just happened to be passing by with an axe, Mrs. Halloway asked, her eyes alight with curiosity as Penelope wrapped a packet of headache powder for her. "How fortunate!" "Indeed it was," Penelope agreed, choosing to ignore the woman's insinuating tone. "Providence sent him my way when I needed him most." "Providence or something else, Mrs. Halloway murmured. "They say he's been asking questions about the town, who owns what, who has money. Very interested in our little Silverdale, your rescuer is." Penelope frowned, handing over the wrapped package. "Mr. Thornton is simply curious about the town. There's nothing unusual in that." "Of course, dear." Mrs. Halloway patted her hand with mock sympathy. "I'm sure your cowboy is exactly what he appears to be. That will be 30 cents for the powder." After the postmaster's wife departed, Penelope found herself troubled by the woman's insinuations. It was true that Yates had asked many questions about Silverdale during supper, but his interest had seemed genuine rather than calculating. Still, she knew little about him beyond what he had chosen to share. At noon, her father shooed her out of the shop with a knowing smile. "Go on, then. Your young man will be waiting." "He's not my young man," Penelope protested, even as she hastily removed her work apron and checked her appearance in the small mirror behind the counter. "As you say," Matthew replied, amusement clear in his voice. "Be home by supper." The town square was a modest green space at the center of Silverdale, featuring a small gazebo and several benches beneath shade trees. As Penelope approached, she spotted Yates immediately, his tall figure standing out among the townspeople going about their business. He was speaking with Sheriff Davis, the two men engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. Penelope hesitated, not wanting to interrupt, but Yates glanced up at that moment and saw her. His serious expression gave way to a smile that transformed his face, and he excused himself from the sheriff with a handshake before striding toward her. "Miss Armstrong," he greeted, removing his hat. "You're a sight for sore eyes on this fine day." Penelope felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Mr. Thornton, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," he assured her, though his eyes flicked briefly back to the sheriff, who was watching them with interest. "Sheriff Davis was just filling me in on some local history." "Sheriff Davis has been in Silverdale since before it was even called Silverdale," Penelope said. "If you want history, he's certainly the one to ask." "So I discovered," Yates agreed, offering his arm. "Shall we begin our tour? I'm eager to see the town through your eyes." Penelope placed her hand on his arm, acutely aware of the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt. "Where would you like to start?" "Wherever you think best," he replied. "You're the guide, after all." For the next 2 hours, Penelope led Yates through Silverdale, showing him the church with its new stained glass windows, the schoolhouse where children spilled out for their midday break, and the various shops and businesses that lined the main street. Throughout it all, Yates listened attentively, asking questions that revealed a sharp mind behind his easy manner. They paused outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, its batwing doors opening occasionally to admit men seeking an early afternoon drink. Piano music and raucous laughter spilled out into the street. "The heart of every frontier town," Yates observed, nodding toward the establishment, "where fortunes are won and lost over cards, and men drink to forget their troubles. Or create new ones," Penelope added. "Most of the trouble in Silverdale starts behind those doors." Yates studied her face. "You disapprove?" "Of drinking and gambling. They're not my concern," she replied. "But I've mixed too many remedies for wives with bruised faces after payday. That I disapprove of greatly." A shadow passed over Yates's expression, as any decent person would. He paused, then added softly, "My father drank. Not often, but when he did, it changed him. My mother learned to take us children to her sisters on those nights." The personal admission surprised Penelope. It was the first time Yates had shared something so intimate about his past. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "It was a long time ago," he replied, his expression clearing. "And not all drinking leads to darkness. Some men can enjoy a whiskey without losing themselves in it." "Are you one of those men, Mr. Thornton?" Penelope asked boldly. Yates's lips curved in a slight smile. "I believe I am, Miss Armstrong, though I prefer coffee when given the choice." They continued their walk, stopping at the bakery where Penelope insisted on treating Yates to Mrs. Caldwell's famous apple tarts. They sat on a bench outside, enjoying the sweet pastries in companionable silence. "May I ask you something, Miss Armstrong?" Yates said after a while, brushing crumbs from his hands. "Of course." "Why has a young woman as intelligent and beautiful as yourself remained in a small town like Silverdale? Surely Denver or even back east would offer more opportunities." Penelope considered the question, surprised by his directness. "My father needs me," she answered simply. "After my mother died of influenza when I was 12, it's been just the two of us. He taught me everything about his trade, and now we work as partners. I can't imagine leaving him to manage alone." "Loyalty to family is admirable," Yates said, his eyes warm with approval. "But have you never wanted more for yourself? A husband, children of your own?" "I've had suitors," Penelope admitted, her gaze dropping to her hands. "The banker's son was quite persistent last year, and Mr. Peterson, the schoolteacher, has made his interest clear, but I've never felt—" She paused, searching for the right words. "That spark," Yates suggested quietly. Penelope looked up, meeting his eyes. "Yes, That indefinable something that tells you this person matters more than anyone else. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then the town clock chimed 3, breaking the spell. "We should continue our tour," Penelope said, rising from the bench. "There's still much to see." As they walked, their conversation turned to books they had read, places they had seen, and dreams they harbored. Penelope was surprised to discover that Yates was well-read, having educated himself during long nights on the trail with volumes of Shakespeare, Dickens, and Twain. "Reading passes the time," he explained as they paused by the town's small lending library. "And it's lighter to carry books than regrets." The afternoon passed more quickly than Penelope could have imagined. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they found themselves at the edge of town, where a small creek gurgled beneath a wooden footbridge. Wildflowers dotted the grassy bank, and cottonwood trees provided dappled shade. "This is my favorite spot in Silverdale," Penelope confessed as they stood on the bridge, watching the water flow beneath them. "When I need to think or just escape for a while, I come here." "I can see why," Yates said, leaning against the railing beside her. "It's peaceful." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of the water and birdsong from the trees. Penelope was acutely aware of Yates's proximity, the way his shoulder nearly touched hers, the faint scent of leather and soap that clung to him. "Penelope," he said softly, using her given name for the first time, "I want to thank you for today." She turned to look at him, surprised by the earnestness in his voice. "For what? I merely showed you around town." "For seeing me as a man, not just a drifter or a hired gun," he replied, his eyes holding hers. "People like me, we pass through towns like this all the time, and mostly we're just shadows to the folks who live here. But you looked at me and saw something worth knowing." The vulnerability in his admission touched something deep within Penelope. "Perhaps because you looked at me and saw more than just an apothecary's daughter," she replied softly. Yates's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a breathless moment, Penelope thought he might kiss her. Instead, he straightened, offering his arm once more. "I should get you home before your father worries," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. The walk back to the apothecary was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the shop, Yates paused on the threshold. "Would it be too forward to call on you again tomorrow?" he asked. Penelope's heart lifted at the question. "Not at all. I work in the shop until noon, as today." "Then I'll see you at noon," Yates said, a smile warming his features. He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused, looking back. "Sleep well, Penelope." "And you, Yates," she replied, his name feeling right on her lips. She watched him walk away, his tall figure cutting a striking silhouette against the setting sun. Only when he disappeared around a corner did she enter the shop, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Her father looked up from his account books, eyebrows raised in silent question. "It was a lovely afternoon," Penelope said before he could ask. "Mr. Thornton is a fascinating man." "I'm sure he is," Matthew replied dryly. "Half the town is talking about you two walking arm in arm through Silverdale," Penelope sighed, unsurprised by the news. "Let them talk. We did nothing improper." "I know that," her father assured her, "but reputations are fragile things, especially for young women. Just be mindful, Penny." "I always am," she promised, kissing his cheek before heading upstairs to freshen up before supper. That night, Penelope's dreams were filled with images of fallen logs, gleaming axes, and a pair of sky-blue eyes that seemed to see into her very soul. The next morning brought unexpected excitement to Silverdale. Penelope was measuring herbs when Sheriff Davis burst into the apothecary, his weathered face grave. "Matt," he addressed her father without preamble, "We've got trouble." The Blackwell gang was spotted 10 miles south of town. Word is they're headed this way. Penelope's hand froze over the scales. The Blackwell gang was notorious throughout the territory, a group of ruthless outlaws who had robbed banks and trains from Kansas to New Mexico. Their leader, Isaiah Blackwell, was said to be as clever as he was cruel. "Are you certain?" Matthew asked, his face paling slightly. "Got confirmation from a cattle driver who passed them on the road," the sheriff confirmed. "Said he recognized Blackwell himself from the wanted posters. I'm gathering men to defend the town if needed." "Can you spare any ammunition from your stockroom?" The apothecary nodded grimly. "Take what you need. Penelope, fetch the key from my desk." As Penelope hurried to retrieve the key to their storeroom, where her father kept a small supply of ammunition for hunting and self-defense, the shop door opened again. Yates stood in the doorway, his expression serious as he took in the scene. "Mr. Thornton," Sheriff Davis acknowledged him with a nod. "Good timing. We could use another gun if you're willing." "I heard the commotion," Yates replied, stepping inside. "Blackwell, is it?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know of him?" "Our paths have crossed," Yates said, his voice neutral. "Never directly, but I've seen the aftermath of his work in other towns." Penelope returned with the key, handing it to her father while studying Yates's face. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, a hardness around his eyes, a tension in his jaw. "Mr. Thornton," she said softly, "you don't have to involve yourself in our troubles." Yates's gaze softened when it met hers. "If Blackwell is coming to Silverdale, it's everyone's trouble, Miss Armstrong. I'd like to help if the sheriff will have me." Sheriff Davis studied Yates for a long moment before nodding. "Meet me at my office in an hour. We're gathering a defense force there." He turned back to Matthew. "Thanks for the ammunition, Matt. Keep your doors locked today, and make sure that old shotgun of yours is loaded." After the sheriff departed with a box of shells, an uneasy silence fell over the apothecary. Matthew began securing the windows, while Penelope stared at Yates with growing concern. "Why would you volunteer for this?" she asked quietly. "You don't even know these people." "I know you," Yates replied simply, "and your father. That's enough reason for me." "But it's dangerous," she protested. "Blackwell doesn't leave witnesses when he robs a town." A shadow crossed Yates's face. All the more reason for every able man to stand against him. Matthew returned from the windows, his expression grave. "Mr. Thornton, I appreciate your willingness to help, but my daughter is right. This isn't your fight." "With respect, sir," Yates said firmly, "when good men do nothing, evil men like Blackwell thrive. I have some experience with situations like this. I might be able to help." "What kind of experience?" Penelope asked, a new suspicion forming in her mind. "You're more than just a cowboy, aren't you?" Yates hesitated, then reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Matthew, who opened it with a frown that quickly gave way to surprise. "You're a federal marshal," the apothecary said, looking up sharply. "Was," Yates corrected. "I turned in my badge 2 years ago, but I still remember the training." Penelope stared at him, feelings of betrayal mingling with confusion. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I'm not that man anymore," Yates replied, his eyes seeking understanding in hers. "I've seen too much violence, delivered too much of it myself. I came west to find peace, not to wear a badge again." "Yet here you are, volunteering to face down outlaws," Matthew observed. Yates sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Some habits are hard to break, I suppose. But this isn't about being a lawman. This is about protecting innocent people, protecting you." His eyes found Penelope's, "from men who would do harm without a second thought." Before Penelope could respond, the door opened again, and a young boy of about 12 rushed in, his face flushed with excitement. "Miss Armstrong, Mr. Armstrong," he exclaimed breathlessly. "Sheriff Davis sent me to tell everyone it was a false alarm." The men they thought were the Blackwell gang were just cowboys moving cattle. Mr. Peterson recognized them when he rode out to scout. Relief washed over the room like a cool breeze. Matthew sank into a chair, shaking his head with a nervous laugh. "Thank God for that." The boy, still catching his breath, turned to Yates with wide eyes. "Sheriff still wants to see you, though, mister. Says it's important." Yates nodded, his expression unreadable. "Tell him I'll be there shortly." As the boy dashed off to deliver more messages, Yates turned back to Penelope and her father. "I should go see what the sheriff wants." "Yates," Penelope said, the use of his given name stopping him at the door. "Will you come back afterward? I think we have much to discuss." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I will. You have my word." After he left, Penelope turned to her father, who was still holding the marshal's identification. "Did you suspect?" Matthew shook his head, returning the paper to her. "Not specifically this, no. But I knew he wasn't a simple drifter. There's a way lawmen carry themselves, a watchfulness in their eyes. I saw it in him that first night." Penelope examined the document, a simple letter of service from the United States Marshals, acknowledging Yates Thornton's honorable discharge from duty in 1873. 2 years ago, just as he'd said. "You think he was telling the truth about giving it up?" she asked, carefully refolding the letter. "I believe he believes it," her father replied thoughtfully. "But some men are called to certain paths whether they choose them or not. Your Mr. Thornton strikes me as such a man." "He's not my Mr. Thornton," Penelope protested automatically, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. Matthew smiled knowingly, but said nothing more on the subject. Together, they reopened the windows and returned to their work, the excitement of the morning gradually giving way to the normal rhythm of the day. Yet Penelope found her thoughts continually drifting to Yates, wondering what the sheriff wanted with him and what secrets he might still be keeping. It was well past noon when the shop door opened again. Yates stood there, his expression troubled. Without a word, he crossed to where Penelope stood behind the counter and placed a wanted poster before her. "The sheriff had this," he said simply. Penelope looked down at the poster, her breath catching in her throat. The likeness was crude but recognizable. Yates's face stared back at her from beneath the bold letters "Wanted." "I don't understand," she whispered, her eyes scanning the text. "Yates Thornton, wanted for the murder of Samuel Blackwell in Oklahoma Territory, 1873. $500 reward." She looked up, confusion and hurt warring in her expression. "Samuel Blackwell, as in?" "Isaiah Blackwell's younger brother," Yates confirmed, his voice tight. "I killed him during a bank robbery in Tulsa. It was a clean shoot. He had a gun on a teller, but Isaiah doesn't see it that way. He's been hunting me ever since." "And that's why you left the Marshals," Penelope realized, pieces falling into place. "Why you keep moving?" Yates nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I couldn't put my fellow Marshals at risk. Blackwell doesn't care who gets hurt in his vendetta against me. So I turned in my badge and disappeared, or tried to. And now this false alarm about Blackwell coming to Silverdale was perhaps not so false after all," Yates finished grimly. "The sheriff thinks Blackwell might have spread that rumor himself, testing the town's defenses. Or worse, trying to flush me out." Penelope felt cold fear seep into her veins. "He knows you're here." "I don't see how he could," Yates replied, though uncertainty clouded his expression. "I've been careful, changed my route often, never stayed in one place too long. But Blackwell has informants everywhere, and he's nothing if not persistent." Matthew emerged from the back room, having overheard the conversation. What does Sheriff Davis say about all this? He's concerned, Yates admitted. But he doesn't have enough men to mount a proper defense if Blackwell does come with his full gang. He's sending a rider to the territorial capital for reinforcements, but they'd be days away at best. Then you should leave, Penelope said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. If you're what Blackwell wants and you leave Silverdale, he'll follow you and leave the town alone. Pain flashed across Yates's features. Is that what you want, Penelope? For me to leave? I want you safe, she replied, her voice breaking slightly. I want everyone safe. If Blackwell comes here because of you, then innocent people could get hurt, Yates finished, his expression hardening. I know, I've lived with that fear for 2 years. Matthew cleared his throat. Mr. Thornton, what do you intend to do? Yates straightened, decision crystallizing in his eyes. I'll leave at first light tomorrow. Make sure I'm seen heading north out of town. With luck, Blackwell will follow me away from Silverdale. And then what? Penelope demanded, anger suddenly rising through her fear. You'll keep running forever, always looking over your shoulder, if that's what it takes, Yates replied quietly. There must be another way, she insisted, coming around the counter to stand before him. Some way to end this without you sacrificing yourself. Penelope, her father cautioned, but she ignored him. You saved my life, she continued, looking up at Yates with fierce determination. Now let me help save yours. There must be something we can do. Yates reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering on her cheek. Your concern means more to me than you know, but this is my burden to bear, not yours. Burdens are lighter when shared, she countered, covering his hand with her own. Isn't that what you told me yesterday, about carrying books instead of regrets? Something shifted in Yates's expression, a softening around his eyes, a subtle surrender in the set of his shoulders. You remember my exact words, he murmured, wonder in his voice. I remember everything about you, Penelope admitted quietly. Matthew cleared his throat again, more pointedly this time. Perhaps we should discuss this upstairs, away from curious eyes, he suggested, nodding toward the window where several townspeople had slowed their pace to peer inside. Upstairs in the family quarters, Matthew poured coffee while Penelope and Yates sat at the small table, the wanted poster between them like an unwelcome guest. For a long moment, no one spoke. If Blackwell is indeed coming to Silverdale, Matthew finally said, setting cups before them, then we need a plan. Running might save the town temporarily, Mr. Thornton, but what about the next town you stop in? And the one after that? I don't see many alternatives, sir, Yates replied grimly. Blackwell has at least 10 men riding with him, all killers. Even if I stood and fought, the odds aren't favorable. Unless you had help, Penelope suggested, her mind racing. The sheriff, his deputy, my father, other men in town who can handle a rifle. No, Yates said firmly. I won't risk civilian lives in my personal war. It's not just your war anymore, Matthew pointed out. If Blackwell comes to Silverdale, he makes it our war too. Better to face him on our terms than his. Yates ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. Even if I agreed, how would we do it? We don't know when Blackwell might come or from which direction. We can't keep the town on alert indefinitely. We make him come when and where we choose, Penelope said suddenly, an idea taking shape. We use his obsession with you against him. Both men looked at her with surprise. What do you mean? Yates asked. We spread word that you're injured, she explained, the plan forming as she spoke. That you were thrown from your horse and can't travel. Blackwell would hear it through his informants and see an opportunity too good to pass up you, vulnerable and unable to run. And then what? Matthew asked, intrigued despite his obvious concern. We'd still be outnumbered. Not if we're prepared, Penelope insisted. We choose the ground, set traps, position men where Blackwell won't expect them. Sheriff Davis said Blackwell is clever, but he's also arrogant. He'd expect to find a wounded man and a few townspeople, not an organized defense. Yates studied her with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. It's risky, he said finally. Very risky if anything went wrong. Life is risk, Penelope replied simply. You risked yours to save me from that fallen log. Why shouldn't I do the same for you? Because I'm not worth it, Yates said so softly she almost didn't hear him. Penelope reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. You are to me. The naked emotion in her voice seemed to stun Yates into silence. His fingers tightened around hers, and for a moment the rest of the world faded away, leaving only the two of them connected by touch and unspoken feelings. Matthew cleared his throat, breaking the spell. I believe my daughter's plan has merit, Mr. Thornton. With proper preparation it could work. But it would require the cooperation of the sheriff and several trustworthy men from town. Yates nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Penelope's. It would, and even then it would be dangerous. More dangerous than facing Blackwell alone, she challenged. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You make a compelling argument, Miss Armstrong. Then you'll consider it, she pressed. I'll speak with Sheriff Davis, Yates conceded, but I make no promises. If he thinks the risk to the town is too great, I'll still leave as planned. Fair enough, Matthew agreed, rising from the table. I'll come with you to see the sheriff. My standing in the community might help persuade him. As the men prepared to leave, Penelope caught Yates's arm, holding him back for a moment. There's something I need to know, she said quietly. If this works, if we stop Blackwell, what then? Will you still leave? The question hung between them, weighted with all the things they hadn't yet said to each other. Yates looked down at her, conflict clear in his eyes. I don't know, he admitted finally. For 2 years, all I've thought about is staying ahead of Blackwell. I haven't let myself think beyond that. Perhaps it's time you did, Penelope suggested softly. Yates touched her cheek gently, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. Perhaps it is, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. After the men departed, Penelope stood at the window, watching as they crossed the street toward the sheriff's office. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. The plan was risky, yes, but the alternative, letting Yates leave to face Blackwell alone, was unthinkable. In just 3 days, the mysterious cowboy who had cut her free from a fallen log had become someone she couldn't imagine losing. The realization should have frightened her, but instead, it filled her with a strange, fierce resolve. Whatever came next, she would face it alongside Yates Thornton. Night had fallen by the time her father and Yates returned. Their grave expressions told Penelope everything she needed to know even before they spoke. The sheriff agreed, Matthew said without preamble as they entered. He's selecting men he trusts to help. The plan is set for 3 days from now. 3 days, Penelope echoed, surprised. Why the delay? We need time to prepare, Yates explained, removing his hat. Set the stage, position men, spread the right rumors. Do it too quickly and Blackwell will suspect a trap. And we're certain he's nearby, she asked. Yates nodded grimly. A cattle driver came in this afternoon. Said he passed a group of hard-looking men camped about 15 miles south. Didn't get close enough to identify them, but the timing is too convenient to ignore. So it begins, Penelope murmured, a chill running down her spine despite the warm evening. You can still change your mind, Yates said quietly. I can leave tonight, draw them away from here. No, Penelope replied firmly. We face this together. She turned to her father. What role do I play in this plan? Matthew and Yates exchanged glances, and she knew immediately what was coming. You'll stay here, safe in the apothecary, her father said, his tone making it clear this was not open for debate. That's absurd, Penelope protested. This was my plan. I should help implement it. Your role is crucial, Yates assured her, stepping closer. You'll tend to my injuries where you can be seen from the street, make it convincing that I'm unable to travel. But when the time comes for confrontation, you'll be safely away from danger. While you risk your life, she challenged, anger rising. I'm not some delicate flower to be sheltered, Yates. I can handle a rifle as well as any man in this town. I don't doubt your courage or your abilities, Yates replied softly. But I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you because of me. Please, Penelope, do this for me. The sincerity in his voice melted her anger, leaving only concern in its wake. And what of you? What if something happens to you? Then I'll have died protecting something worth protecting, he said simply. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Matthew, sensing the charged emotion, quietly excused himself to the kitchen, leaving them alone in the sitting room. Why did you really come to Silverdale? Penelope asked suddenly. Was it truly coincidence that brought you to that forest when I needed help? Yates sighed, moving to the window and looking out at the darkened street. Complete coincidence, he confirmed. I was tracking that mountain lion just as I told you. I had no intention of stopping in Silverdale at all, was planning to pass through without even staying the night. And now you're risking your life for this town, she observed, coming to stand beside him. For me. He turned to her, his expression solemn. Some things are worth the risk. What changed your mind? Penelope pressed. About stopping here, about staying. You, Yates admitted, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. When I heard your cry for help in those woods, I thought I was saving a stranger. I didn't know I was finding the one person who would make me want to stop running. Penelope's heart skipped a beat at his words. Yates, I know it's too soon, he continued, his eyes holding hers. We've known each other only days. But in those days, you've shown me more kindness, more understanding than I've known in years. You've reminded me what it feels like to care about someone, to want to stay instead of always leaving. Then stay, she urged, reaching for his hand. After this is over, stay in Silverdale. If we succeed, Yates replied, his fingers entwining with hers, if Blackwell is stopped, then perhaps I can finally stop running. Perhaps I can build something here. With me? Penelope asked boldly, her heart in her throat. In answer, Yates drew her closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek. If you'll have me, he murmured, his eyes asking permission. Penelope answered by closing the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with unleashed emotion. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as years of loneliness and longing found release in their embrace. When they finally parted, both breathing deeply, Yates rested his forehead against hers. Now I have even more reason to ensure our plan succeeds, he said, a smile in his voice. We will succeed, Penelope assured him, conviction in her tone. And then we'll have all the time in the world to explore. This. The sound of Matthew returning from the kitchen prompted them to step apart, though their hands remained joined. Her father raised an eyebrow at their linked fingers but made no comment. It's getting late, he observed instead. Mr. Thornton, the sheriff suggested you stay somewhere unexpected tonight in case Blackwell already has eyes in town. Our spare room is at your disposal if you wish. Thank you, sir, Yates replied, genuine gratitude in his voice. I accept your kind offer. Later, as Penelope lay in her bed listening to the quiet movements of Yates settling into the small guest room across the hall, she found herself torn between fear for what the coming days would bring and a newfound hope for the future. Whatever happened with Blackwell, She knew with certainty that her life had changed irrevocably the moment Yates Thornton had swung his axe to free her from beneath that fallen log. With that thought warming her heart, she drifted into sleep, dreaming of a life where running was no longer necessary and love had found a permanent home. The next 3 days passed in a carefully choreographed performance. Yates made a show of being thrown from his horse in the town square, with plenty of witnesses to spread the tale. Penelope and her father brought him to the apothecary, where he was seen through the windows, bandaged and apparently unable to walk without assistance. Sheriff Davis selected 5 men he trusted implicitly to help with their plan, men who could handle weapons and keep secrets. Among them were Mr. Peterson, the schoolteacher who proved to be an excellent marksman; Ben Wilson, a former cavalry soldier who ran the livery stable; and Pastor Williams, whose gentle demeanor belied his determination to protect his flock. While Yates played the role of injured marshal by day, at night he helped train the men, setting up defensive positions and planning their strategy. The apothecary's back room became their headquarters, where maps were studied and scenarios discussed in hushed voices. Throughout it all, Penelope insisted on being included in the planning, even as she was excluded from the fighting. Her knowledge of the town and its surroundings proved invaluable, and her sharp mind often found solutions to problems the men had overlooked. On the morning of the 3rd day, a young boy from the edge of town arrived breathless at the sheriff's office with news. Riders had been spotted approaching from the south, moving slowly but deliberately toward Silverdale. "It's time," Sheriff Davis announced grimly when he brought the news to the apothecary. "Everyone to their positions." The plan was simple but carefully considered. Yates would be visible in the upstairs window of the apothecary, seemingly bedridden. The sheriff and his deputy would position themselves openly on the main street, giving the appearance of only minimal protection. The other men would be hidden in strategic locations: the church bell tower, the alley beside the bank, the rooms above the general store, all with clear lines of fire to the main street. "Remember," Yates instructed as the men prepared to take their positions, "Blackwell is mine. Focus on his gang, but leave him to me if possible. He's cunning and dangerous, don't underestimate him." As the men dispersed, Yates turned to Penelope, who stood watching with barely contained anxiety. "You remember what to do?" he asked softly. She nodded. "When the shooting starts, I stay in the back room with Father, away from windows. We've prepared bandages and medicines for afterward." "Good," Yates said, reaching out to take her hand. When this is over," Penelope interrupted firmly, "we'll have plenty of time to discuss the future. Just make sure you're alive for that conversation." A smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam." He leaned down, kissing her briefly but thoroughly before pulling away with obvious reluctance. "For luck," he murmured. "Come back to me," she whispered in response. With a final nod to Matthew, who stood protectively near his daughter, Yates headed upstairs to take his position by the window, a rifle hidden just out of sight behind the curtain. Penelope and her father moved to the back room as planned, but she couldn't resist peering through the small window that overlooked the main street. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The town had taken on an eerie quiet. Most citizens had been warned to stay indoors, and the usual bustle of activity was conspicuously absent. Then she saw them. 8 riders entered the main street from the south, moving at a deliberate walk, their horses kicking up dust in the morning sun. At their head rode a man whose mere presence sent a chill down Penelope's spine, even from a distance. Tall and lean, with a shock of iron-gray hair beneath a black hat, he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who feared nothing and no one. Isaiah Blackwell had arrived. The riders stopped in the center of town, directly in front of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Sheriff Davis emerged from his office across the street, his deputy beside him, both men's hands resting meaningfully on their holstered revolvers. "Morning, gentlemen," the sheriff called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Something I can help you with." Blackwell's laugh was audible even from where Penelope stood watching. "Perhaps, Sheriff, I hear you're harboring a fugitive in your charming little town." "A man by the name of Thornton." "Don't know about any fugitive," Sheriff Davis replied evenly. "But we do have a Mr. Thornton recovering from injuries at our apothecary. Had a bad fall from his horse a few days back." Blackwell's gaze shifted to the apothecary, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Yates in the upstairs window. "How unfortunate for him," he drawled, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "I'm afraid Mr. Thornton and I have some unfinished business. I'll need to see him." "He's in no condition for visitors," the sheriff countered. "Doctor's orders." "I wasn't asking permission," Blackwell said, his tone hardening as he dismounted, followed by his men. "You have two choices, Sheriff. Step aside or join him in whatever hell awaits." Penelope held her breath as tension crackled in the air. This was the moment of truth. Would Blackwell suspect a trap, or would his arrogance lead him into their carefully laid ambush? For a long, heart-stopping moment, Blackwell surveyed the street, his cold eyes taking in every detail. Then, with a dismissive wave to his men, he started walking toward the apothecary. "Take care of the law," he instructed over his shoulder. "I'll handle Thornton myself." Two of his men moved toward the sheriff and deputy, while the others spread out, hands hovering near their weapons. None of them noticed the slight movement in the church tower, or the shadow that shifted in the alley beside the bank. As Blackwell approached the apothecary, Sheriff Davis gave the signal, a casual adjustment of his hat. Instantly, the quiet morning erupted into chaos as shots rang out from multiple directions. Two of Blackwell's men fell immediately, caught in the crossfire from hidden positions. The others scrambled for cover, returning fire wildly as they tried to identify their attackers. Blackwell himself dove behind a water trough, his revolver drawn as he scanned the buildings around him, rage contorting his features when he realized he'd walked into a trap. "Thornton," he bellowed, firing toward the apothecary window where Yates had been visible moments before. "Face me, you coward." The window was empty now. Yates had disappeared from view as soon as the shooting started, and Penelope knew he would be making his way downstairs to confront Blackwell directly. "Penelope, get away from that window," her father urged, pulling her toward the center of the room. "I need to know what's happening," she protested, though she allowed herself to be moved to relative safety. Outside, the gunfight continued. The sheriff and his deputy had taken cover behind a nearby wagon, exchanging fire with Blackwell's men. From the church tower, Mr. Peterson's rifle cracked rhythmically, each shot finding its mark with deadly precision. Pastor Williams and Ben Wilson maintained a steady fire from their positions, gradually whittling down the outlaws' numbers. Penelope heard the back door of the shop open quietly, and a moment later, Yates slipped into the storeroom, his expression grim and determined. "Yates!" she exclaimed, relief flooding through her at the sight of him unharmed. "What are you doing? I thought you'd be upstairs." "Changing the plan," he replied, checking his revolver. "Blackwell will expect me to stay put, thinking I'm injured. I'm going to circle around and come at him from behind." "That's too dangerous," Matthew protested. "He'll be watching for you. It's the only way to end this quickly," Yates insisted. "Every minute this goes on, the risk to the town increases." He turned to Penelope, his eyes softening. "I promised you a future. I intend to keep that promise." Before she could respond, he was gone, slipping out the back door as silently as he had entered. Unable to bear the suspense, Penelope moved back to the window, ignoring her father's objections. The scene outside had changed. 3 of Blackwell's men lay motionless in the street, while 2 others had taken refuge in the saloon. The sheriff and one of his volunteers were pinned down behind an overturned cart, exchanging occasional shots with the saloon. Blackwell himself remained behind the water trough, his attention fixed on the apothecary's front entrance, clearly expecting Yates to emerge there. He didn't notice the figure moving stealthily along the side of the building across the street, working his way around to come up behind him. Penelope held her breath as Yates crept closer, using the chaos of the gunfight as cover for his approach. 20 feet separated him from Blackwell, then 15, then 10. At that moment, a wounded outlaw spotted Yates and shouted a warning. Blackwell spun around, his revolver rising with snake-like speed. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously, Blackwell's and Yates's. Penelope's heart stopped as both men staggered. Blackwell clutched his chest, a look of disbelief crossing his features as crimson spread across his shirt. He took one stumbling step forward, then collapsed face first into the dust of the street. Yates remained standing, though he had dropped to one knee, his left arm hanging limp at his side. Even from a distance, Penelope could see the dark stain spreading on his sleeve. Yates is hit, she cried, already moving toward the door. Father, I need to help him. Penelope, wait. Matthew called after her, but she was already running through the shop and out the front door. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, lost whatever resolve they had left. One threw down his weapon in surrender, while another attempted to mount his horse and flee, only to be brought down by a shot from the church tower. Penelope barely noticed any of this as she raced to where Yates knelt in the street, his face pale but determined. You're supposed to be in the back room, he admonished weakly as she reached him. And you're supposed to be careful, she retorted, examining his wound with practiced hands. Blackwell's bullet had torn through the meat of his upper arm, painful and bleeding freely, but not immediately life-threatening if properly treated. Can you walk? I've had worse, Yates assured her, though he accepted her support as he rose to his feet. Together, they made their way back to the apothecary, where Matthew was already preparing his surgical instruments and medicinal herbs. The sounds of gunfire had ceased entirely, replaced by the voices of men securing the scene and tending to the wounded. Is it over? Penelope asked as she helped Yates onto a chair in the back room. It's over, he confirmed, wincing as Matthew cut away his sleeve to expose the wound. Blackwell, dead, she replied simply. Yates closed his eyes briefly, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face: relief, regret, and finally, peace. Then it's truly finished. While Matthew cleaned and stitched the wound, Sheriff Davis arrived to report that all of Blackwell's men were either dead, wounded, or captured. The town had suffered only minor injuries among the defenders, with no civilian casualties. You did good work today, Thornton, the sheriff acknowledged gruffly. Silverdale owes you a debt. Yates shook his head. I brought this trouble to your doorstep. If anything, it's I who owe Silverdale. Well, there might be a way to repay that debt, Sheriff Davis suggested, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. My deputy's heading to Denver next month to study law. I'll be needing a new right-hand man. Surprise registered on Yates's face. Are you offering me a job, Sheriff? Just something to consider, Davis replied with a shrug. Town could use a man with your experience, and I ain't getting any younger. With a knowing glance between Yates and Penelope, he added, Seems to me you might have reason to put down roots here. After the sheriff departed, Penelope finished bandaging Yates's arm while her father prepared a pain-relieving tincture. The three worked in comfortable silence until Matthew excused himself to check on other possible injuries in town, leaving them alone. "The sheriff made a good point," Penelope said as she secured the final bandage. "You do have reason to stay in Silverdale now." Yates caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "The best reason I could imagine. Is that your way of saying you'll accept his offer?" she asked, hope rising in her chest. "It's my way of saying I'll stay," Yates clarified, his eyes serious as they met hers. "Whether as deputy sheriff or in some other capacity remains to be seen. But my wandering days are over, Penelope. If you'll have me, I want to build a life here with you." Joy bloomed within her like a desert flower after rain. "I'll have you," she whispered, leaning down to kiss him gently. "For as long as you'll stay." "Then you'd better prepare for forever," Yates murmured against her lips, "because that's how long I intend to remain by your side." In the days that followed, Silverdale gradually returned to normal. The bodies of Blackwell and his men were buried in unmarked graves outside town, their weapons and horses sold to compensate those who had suffered property damage during the gunfight. The two surviving outlaws were transported to Denver to stand trial. Yates's wound healed cleanly under Penelope's attentive care. After careful consideration, he accepted Sheriff Davis's offer to become deputy sheriff of Silverdale, a position that would allow him to use his skills and experience for the protection of the community he now called home. 3 months after the day he had cut her free from beneath a fallen log, Yates Thornton stood before Pastor Williams in the Silverdale church, watching with wonder as Penelope Armstrong walked down the aisle toward him on her father's arm. Her dress, a creation of ivory silk and lace, had been ordered specially from Denver, and in Yates's eyes, no bride had ever looked more beautiful. "Nervous?" Matthew asked quietly as he placed his daughter's hand in Yates's. "Not even slightly," Yates replied with absolute certainty, his eyes never leaving Penelope's radiant face. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, witnessed by the entire town that had come to embrace the former marshal as one of their own. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the congregation seemed to shake the very rafters of the church. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music and dancing in the town square. As evening fell, Yates led his bride away from the festivities, toward the small house they had purchased on the edge of town close enough for Penelope to continue working with her father at the apothecary, yet with enough land for Yates to pursue his newfound interest in raising horses. "Happy, Mrs. Thornton?" Yates asked as they stood on the porch of their new home, the sounds of the town's celebration drifting to them on the night breeze. "Completely," Penelope replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still find it hard to believe that all of this began with a fallen log and your axe. I think it began long before that," Yates mused, his arms tightening around her. "Some things are meant to be, even if the path that leads to them seems random. Philosophy from a cowboy," she teased, turning in his arms to look up at him. "Former cowboy," he corrected with a smile. "Current deputy sheriff, future horse breeder, and forever your devoted husband." As the stars appeared above Silverdale, Penelope and Yates Thornton stood on the threshold of their shared future, both knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they had faced down Isaiah Blackwell, just as they had overcome the obstacle of a fallen log in a Colorado forest. For Penelope, who had once felt trapped both literally and figuratively, life had opened up like the vast western sky. And for Yates, who had spent years running from his past, the act of cutting her free had, in its own way, liberated him as well. Their love story, born in danger and forged through adversity, was just beginning. but as they crossed the threshold of their new home together, both knew with absolute certainty that it would be a story worth telling for generations to come, the tale of a trapped woman, a wandering cowboy, and the axe that had brought them together against all odds. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn day, Penelope Thornton stood on the porch of their expanded homestead, watching as her husband demonstrated the proper way to hold an axe to their 4-year-old son, James. The boy, a miniature version of his father with his mother's hazel eyes, listened with solemn attention, his small hands barely able to grip the handle of the child-sized tool Yates had crafted for him. "That's it, Jamie," Yates encouraged, guiding the boy's stance. "Wide feet, strong back. The axe does the work, you just guide it." "Like when you saved Mama?" James asked, looking up at his father with adoration. Yates smiled, ruffling the boy's sandy hair. "Something like that, though I hope you never have to rescue anyone from beneath a fallen tree." "If I do, I'll be ready," the child declared with determination, giving the axe a careful practice swing under his father's watchful eye. Penelope laughed, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. The sound drew Yates's attention, and he looked up, his love for her as clear in his eyes as it had been on their wedding day. "What's amusing you, Mrs. Thornton?" he called, setting aside the axe to approach the porch. "Just thinking about how far we've come," she replied, accepting his gentle kiss as he joined her. Deputy Sheriff Thornton, respected horse breeder, beloved husband and father. A far cry from the mysterious cowboy who wandered into my life. "Best wandering I ever did," Yates murmured, his hand joining hers over their unborn child. "Though I haven't felt the need to wander since." Inside the house, Matthew Armstrong could be heard playing the piano, a recent addition to their home that had brought music into their daily lives. The older man had sold the apothecary business 2 years earlier, but continued to help Penelope with her own thriving practice as a healer and midwife. He had moved into a small cottage on their property, close enough to dote on his grandson and future grandchildren, yet allowing the young family their privacy. Sheriff Davis had finally retired the previous spring, and Yates had been elected to take his place, a position he filled with the same quiet competence he brought to everything he did. Silverdale had grown considerably in the 5 years since the Blackwell incident, but it remained a peaceful community where neighbors looked out for one another, and children played safely in the streets. "Papa, look," James called, having returned to his axe practice. The boy made a careful swing at a small log Yates had set up for him, the blade biting into the wood with a satisfying thunk. "Well done," Yates called back proudly. "You're a natural, son." As they watched their firstborn practice his newfound skill, Penelope leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The open road, the freedom to go wherever the wind took you." Yates considered the question thoughtfully before shaking his head. "Not once," he replied with conviction. "What I thought was freedom was really just running. This," he gestured to their home, their son, the life they had built together. "This is true freedom, the freedom to stay, to build, to love without looking over my shoulder." "Even with all the responsibilities," she pressed. "Sheriff, business owner, husband, father. Especially with those," Yates assured her, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "Each one a choice I made willingly, each one a joy I never thought I'd have." The baby kicked beneath their joined hands as if in agreement, and they both laughed. "She's strong," Yates observed. "Like her mother, she," Penelope questioned with raised eyebrow. "You seem very certain it's a girl." "Just a feeling," he replied with a mysterious smile. "A little daughter with her mother's chestnut hair and determined spirit." "Heaven help us if that's true," Penelope said with mock horror. "One headstrong woman in this family is quite enough." I wouldn't have it any other way, Yates assured her, his tone becoming serious. Your strength is what drew me to you from the beginning, trapped beneath that log, but still fighting, still hoping. You changed everything for me, Penelope. As you did for me, she replied softly. My valiant cowboy with an axe. James came running up to them, his face flushed with excitement and pride. Mama, Papa, I did it. I split the log just like Papa showed me. Wonderful, darling, Penelope praised, bending carefully to hug him despite her pregnancy. You'll be as skilled as your father in no time. Can we have the story again tonight? James asked eagerly. About how Papa rescued you from the forest. It was his favorite bedtime tale, though Yates and Penelope had modified certain aspects for young ears, leaving out the more violent parts about Blackwell and his gang. Of course, Yates agreed, lifting the boy into his arms. But first, I believe Grandpa has baked cookies and someone should probably investigate. With a whoop of delight, James squirmed to be set down and raced into the house, calling for his grandfather. Yates and Penelope followed at a more sedate pace, his arm around her waist supporting her as they walked. I never tire of telling that story, Penelope admitted as they entered their home, warm with the scent of baking and the sound of laughter. It reminds me how quickly life can change, how one moment, one choice can alter everything. One fallen log, Yates mused. One sharp axe, she continued. One brave woman, he added. One honorable man, she finished, turning to face him in the doorway of their kitchen, where their son and her father were already deep in the serious business of selecting the perfect cookie. Yates's hands came up to frame her face, his expression one of profound gratitude and love. Every day, I thank whatever fate or providence led me to that forest at exactly the right moment, he said softly, for her ears alone. Every day I fall in love with you all over again. As do I, Penelope whispered back, standing on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. And I always will. In the warm embrace of their family home, surrounded by the life they had built together, Penelope and Yates Thornton shared a moment of perfect understanding, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with a journey outward, but with the journey home. And for them, home would always be wherever they were together, their love as enduring as the mountains that cradled their little corner of the Wild West.